more you study Scripture, the more you realize you don't know much. Esther has been, we talked about it from week 1, but Esther is a really difficult book as far as just questions, and it brings up, it's a really interesting book. It's an exciting book. It challenges you. There's all kinds of questions that come out, and you try and figure out stuff. And let's go to chapter 3, and I'll go through the first few verses quick, and then we'll get into the meat of it. Sometime later, King Xerxes, verse 1, promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and that's what we talked about. Remember, because Saul was disobedient, they're still around. So again, what you do today affects tomorrow, right? Your sin of today can really not just mess you up, but it messed Saul up, but it also messed Israel up. In the context of Esther, the enemy has always been against God's people. And what that really amounts to today is, at this point, it's the church and it's Israel. I mean, that's primarily who the devil's after, right? Christians and Israel. Because if he can destroy Israel, he's destroyed the promises of God. If he destroys the church, you can understand the ramifications of that. But there's a promise in God's word that the gates of hell will never prevail against us. And Israel has definitely got a future. So neither one of them can happen. But that's what the devil tries to do, right? He's always done that. He came after Jesus. He came after Moses. He's always, it's the same thing. He's always tried to stop this line. What you do see in Esther is kind of this same rhetoric of coming after God's people. I'm not saying they're linked, but there's this kind of spirit of Antichrist in here. You can see it all. And whilst some things change, nothing changes. And so this man, again, look, God doesn't wait for Haman to be promoted or Haman to be promoted and then say what we're going to do with him. God's allowed Haman to be here. God's allowed the promotion in politics and everything. You have to understand that, otherwise you'll get really discouraged and despondent. And he became the most powerful official in the empire. It's funny, right? Because if you knew him, or there might be a sense of where you read Esther, you say, I wish he hadn't been promoted to that. We talked on Wednesday night about not interfering with God's plans and how we try to meddle sometimes. And Abraham did it with sleeping with Hagar, and that was a nightmare. And we try and get ahead, right? We try and hey, God, this isn't working, and let me help you out. And you see in politics even, sometimes people get powerful positions, and all you want to do is shout and scream. But God knows what's coming. It's not like we have to watch it play out and then we react. He's already seen it. He knows this is going to be an attack on God's people. It's going to be an attack on the Jews. And God's seen it, and God's prepared for it, and God knows. And if you've read the book of Esther, you know that what the devil means for harm, God, in a twist of irony, and is going to turn it out for good. And so be careful, like we said on Wednesday night. Again, don't evaluate your circumstances too quick. You have to let it play out. You have to let God's purposes be fulfilled. We tend to knee-jerk it. We tend to look at the situation and panic. Let it play out. And when it plays out, you won't have the same reaction. It'll be all right. Let it just all play out. So this man, this evil man, this kind of guy with the spirit of Antichrist that you'll see, is put into office. Haman. Verse 2, all the king's officials would bow down before Haman. If you're in a powerful position and everyone's bowing to you, what do you think is going to happen to you? Even if you start off a nice person, what do you think is going to happen to you? Yeah, 100%. What's going to be your biggest issue in life? Humility and pride, right? How many people can handle that? I would venture to say some might do better than others, and some might last longer than others, but all of us would struggle in that capacity. The idea is, if everyone bowed to me, that'd be awesome, but I think that would be a struggle. And Haman, without God, think about this for a second. If God's not in the picture, if you don't think about God, believe in God, want God, who gets the credit? I mean, if you take God out of it and you get a promotion, who gets the credit? Yeah, you or somebody else, right? Well, it was just my boss was a nice person, or but if you take God out of it, whoever gets the credit is the wrong person, right? And most of the time we try and credit ourselves, right? I earned this. You ever notice that even in like advertisements, they try and make you like, you deserve this. Like, you deserve this donut. I think, oh, great, I can have 3 of them then, all right. They play on that though, right? You deserve this. Because if you deserve it, then you get to what? Yeah, you get to take it guilt-free, right? Yeah, there you go. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect. That's a trap. Whenever he passed by, for so the king had commanded. The king had commanded it. Man, Haman loved that. Haman got used to that. Here's the problem with that. If 200, and we'll see it, if 299 out of 300 do it, is that enough? If 299 people acknowledge you and bow to you, but there's 300, what happens? And what happens? Do you go home at night thankful for 299 that bowed? Or do you go home flaming mad about the one that didn't? It's kind of like this. Take 299 compliments today. And take one rough, what's the word? Yeah, there you go, thank you. I was going to say abuse, that sounds harsh. Criticism. And you know what you'd fascinate on? It's just the way, and it's crazy, right? They say that it takes 10 they said something like it takes 10 compliments to do, if you want to get back in someone's good graces, it takes 10 compliments to outride one bad criticism. What'd you say? Yeah, sincere, yes, you're correct, sincere compliments. But, so they're showing him respect. All of a sudden, remember we said, and again in Esther it's kind of, but Esther, they don't know she's Jewish. They don't know, and Haman is going to tell them he's Jewish. Which is kind of crazy because, again, the argument probably is they should have been seen to be Jewish because Jews are different, and he's going to make a point of that. It's kind of like saying nobody at work knows I'm a Christian. Well, that shouldn't, right? They should. You shouldn't have to say, hey, I'm a Christian. They should know it, right? And because, by your act, absolutely. I mean, if you're just like everybody else, then that's a problem because what you're telling everyone is God doesn't really make that much difference, right? So they're bowing, they're worshiping, they're respecting him. And that's kind of, it's weird for a king to allow that. Not many kings would allow that to happen, right? But he's obviously secure in his power and whatever. And so whenever they pass by, for the king had commanded, but Mordecai, here we go. And here now he takes a step. And again, I don't know how Esther ended up in this pageant like she did. 400 young women, it's weird because she had to sleep with the king. There's a whole, that's what I'm saying. This gets scripturally, and theologically it gets messy. It's hard to figure out. It's not easy but Mordecai refuses. Now, I think the context is, why does he bow down? Why will he not bow down? Why will he not bow down to Haman? Well, A, he's what? Yeah, he's Jewish. He's a believer. But B, I don't think they got along anyway. But, there's a lot into this. But the main point, I think, is it's never been good. It's been the challenge of the 3 Hebrew boys, right? It was a challenge of Daniel. It's always been the challenge of the Jewish people, bow or die. In the end times, in the tribulation, it's going to be the same thing. Bow or die. Or it's better to die with Jesus than to bow without him, right? And so he refuses. He will not bow or show him respect. Now, whether there's animosity there, whether this is just a strictly Jewish thing, but he will not do it. Now, this is what we're talking about this morning. That's awesome. You take a stand, but guess what? When you take a stand, what I told you this morning, when Mordecai takes a stand, he's going to have a run-in with the enemy, but he's also going to have a run-in with God. 2 things are assured when you take a stand. The enemy's coming, but so is the Lord. If you stand for the Lord, he's coming. But if you stand for the Lord, the world, the devil, whatever is coming for you too. And that's, again, when I take a stand, what my focus is kind of like the compliments again. Like, am I just going to think about God and take his word, or am I going to get wrapped up in, who else is coming after me? you'll see, and Mordecai, sometimes we don't want to make, and this is really interesting to me, sometimes we don't want to make a stand because of the trouble it will cause other people. Mordecai's stand is going to put every Jewish person in under the radar. Because of what he does, the devil goes after all the Jews. Mordecai was right, but taking a stand is expensive sometimes, right? And you better be sure of it, because if they're coming after all the Jews, he could just say, forget that, I'm just going to bow, right? But it's always deeper. It's always, I always forget the name of it, but Christians have always dealt with this. I think it's called the Agora. It was a marketplace. It was in Corinth. They had these marketplaces, and the devil spins these things, and he's going to do it in the tribulation too. But the marketplace was where you bought and sold, right? The marketplace is where you got your stuff. The marketplace was where you made your money, etc., right? It's kind of like Kroger, right? But you're selling to Kroger, you're buying from Kroger, it becomes important. Well, there was one nuance to this. To enter into the Agora, or whatever it's called, you had to sprinkle sacrifice. You had this, like, I don't know, kind of like ashes. And you sprinkle, and what it really was worshiping Caesar. What you were doing was proclaiming that Caesar is Lord. And so people, to get into the marketplace, would have to basically say Caesar is Lord. Now you can see what would people do? How would obviously to say Caesar is Lord goes against everything you believe in, right? I mean, what would you do at your favorite supermarket if they said you have to renounce Jesus, but then you can come in? But you can see where people would be like, Lord, I'm going to do this. You understand, right? I don't really mean it. I'm just doing it. I mean, but the deal was Christians actually had to set up their own places. They had to make a stand, and they had to, and kind of like, they had to take care of each other, because they refused to go into that marketplace if getting into that marketplace meant I had to say Caesar was Lord. So this has always been a challenge, right? And you think, what happens one day to us if it's illegal to come to church, etc., etc.? We might get there, right? Quicker than we hope. So there's always been a challenge. He won't bow. Verse 3. The palace official. Man, people are crazy. And the devil always has his henchmen. The palace officials. Now, remember, everyone else but Mordecai is what? Everyone else is bowing. Everyone else is bowing. So they naturally don't like what? Think about this for a second. Why, if you're bowing, do you not like the guy that does? I think there's two main reasons. If you're bowing to Haman, why do you not like Mordecai? Because he's either going against what you believe in. You're either doing it because you believe in it, and that's why you're doing it, right? Or you're doing it out of pressure. You're doing it out of weakness. You're doing it out of fear. And seeing Haman stands actually makes you feel what? Have you ever been around someone, maybe they're being bullied or someone, and for whatever reason, as a kid or whatever, you don't stand up for them, and then someone else does. And then it becomes a problem because you realize what? Man, I should have. So all of the people, for whatever reason, are upset, and maybe they believe what Mordecai, maybe they hate Jewish people too. But there's a reason that everybody is bowing, and the king has allowed it, and maybe it's the easy way out. Maybe they really don't care. And listen, if you don't have Jesus, saying Caesar is Lord and not meaning it isn't a big deal. Who cares? Just do what you can. But it's different when you come to Jesus. That's part of confession, is you give up everything. He's your Lord, and he doesn't play games. He doesn't accept like second place. And so the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why are you disobeying the king's command? Well, again, I think the inference is because he's Jewish. Because Mordecai knows God. They spoke to him, and this is what the devil does. He's been doing this for a while, or however long, and now all of a sudden people start to what? And they don't ask once. Why? Because most of us can stand a little pressure. Most of us can say, hey, why don't you do that? Now, sometimes we fall at the first sight of temptation. But sometimes if you look back, I've done it, maybe you haven't. You ever said no to a sin and you got all excited and you thought, man, I've really made it, and then you fail? Man, I didn't do that, Lord. I must be really close to you. I'm good. And a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. I mean, I remember even like smiling and being like, you didn't get me, devil. Like, just think like, I'm good. Watch when you say that. But he speaks to him what? Day after day. It's just yapping in your ear. Why? And by the way, that question's easily answerable one time. I don't have to keep asking me. Why are you doing that? I love Jesus. That's it. I mean, if the world wants to know why we're doing things, I follow Jesus. What else do you need? That answer don't change. But what they're trying to do is what? Make you doubt, They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So I think there's an inference of why, and there's an inference of just for goodness sake, just what? Just do it. Because if you tick Haman off, he's what? He's powerful. It's kind of like don't tick the boss off. Right? That's not good for anybody. If you make Haman mad, imagine you're bowing and you don't have a problem with bowing, and someone else not bowing is going to it actually doesn't bring them problems, so to speak. Eventually it will, actually. You'd be upset. But look, day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman. Why are they speaking to Haman? This is just, what's the word? Like, right, yeah, that's a good, yeah, it's ick. It's buttering him up, yeah, it's just sleazy. They go to Haman, and they wanted to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct. Yeah, instead of just dropping it, they're like, hey, are you going to put up with this? And now how Haman reacts to this, if Haman says no, what's at play? Why does Haman want to make sure he does something about this? Set a precedent, everybody sees it. If Haman says, I'm going to let him get away with it, what do you think the next thing to happen is? Yeah, somebody else is going to say, if you're not going to do it, then guess what? If there's no it's kind of like when you make rules. Here's what's hard about church, about your home, about work, if you're a boss, whatever. I've learned it's a lot easier to write rules than it is to live by them. Here's the thing. Bill, you own your business, whatever. You can make all these rules. Somebody somewhere is going to bust out a rule. And the first time they bust out that rule, they're going to watch. Because if you say thou shalt not and they do it and you don't do anything, guess what? That shalt not has lost its power and everybody else is going to do it. That leads to people going crazy at the first offender for the opposite reason. Like if I come down hard on you, it's going to stop all these people doing it. So it's hard, right? We deal with that in church. Like there's certain rules I would like to put in place, but I think, man, how are we ever going to enforce that? And if we're not going to enforce it, then when someone breaks it and they just look at me and I don't do anything, then guess what they're going to do? They speak to him. And they want to know if you're going to tolerate it, Mordecai. Well, when someone's used to getting puffed up and proud, they're not going to react. And look at how smarmy this is. Since Mordecai had told them he was what? This is what's crazy. I can't explain it. What was Mordecai's instruction to Esther? Yeah. Don't tell them you're a Jew. And apparently for a while, Mordecai didn't tell them he was a Jew. But now we find out at some point Mordecai says, by the way, I'm a what? And it's almost like, everyone's fine with you at work until they find out you're a Christian, right? And then something's changed. Actually, and they might not even say anything, but when they need to use it, here it comes. Mordecai had told them, again, like you'll have to ask Mordecai, why are you telling Esther? What? I don't know. I'm just telling you what happened. But he tells them he's a Jew. Now again, I think where they're at, they've been okay. I mean, they're in Persia, they've been okay. Jewish people have been all right. I don't think it's terrible. It's not a concentration camp, though. You wouldn't you're right. I mean, when people come looking for you to go to concentration camps, no one jumping up and down saying, I'm Jewish. But I don't think the situation's bad, and Mordecai's in a decent position. And anyway, whether he lets his guard down or whether he should, I don't know. But he tells them, I'm a Jew. And it comes back right to their advantage, or they think. Verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was what? He was furious. He was filled with rage. Why is he filled with rage? Well, look, when you're puffed up, when you told you somebody and someone doesn't bow to you, you can see why that would tick you off. But there's bigger at play here. He hasn't just got that. That's natural, emotional, fleshly stuff. If I said bow to me and you don't, especially when you're the only one not doing it, it can get, you can see why people are enraged by that, right? But it's not just them being filled with rage. There's a spiritual warfare going on here. That the devil is working overtime to increase that rage because he's not actually, Haman is just a vehicle. The devil doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about them. He doesn't care about what happens to you. He uses you as a pawn. You're just a vehicle to get what's, right? The ends doesn't have to justify the means. He's the devil. And so what he's doing, this is much bigger than Haman versus Mordecai. This is God versus the devil. This is Jew versus non-Jew. This is spiritual warfare. And so behind in the flesh, Haman isn't just dealing with his flesh. I think he's being overwrought by the devil who's inciting this hatred. Think about it. Why does Antichrist hate believers? Why will he hate believers? The same thing. They won't bow. They won't accept his power. They go against everything he longs for. And he's of the devil. The Antichrist will be of the devil, and he will have a hatred for believers and Jewish people simply because he's a puppet for the devil. And the devil's inciting that. And the devil's fueling that. And so it says, Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect. Maybe the first time he's, whatever, he'll do it tomorrow. But this is a pattern now. And it doesn't just say he got a little antsy. It says he got filled with rage. Or he's furious. Verse 6. Why does the Bible point this out? Like, why? Because this is a massive part of the story. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality. So again, your cynical side or your fleshly side says, oh, Mordecai, if you just shut your mouth, none of this would have happened. Our flesh always also could say, if you just bow to him, this wouldn't have happened. But God's over all of this. And if you're scared to say you're a Jew, then you don't fully understand God. If you're scared to stand up because it might cost you or someone else, we don't understand really what's happening. He had learned of his nationality. Again, all throughout the ages, because God chose the Jews have always been messed with. Always. So he decided, listen to this. He wants to make a point. He's not, you know yourself, there's levels of madness, right? There's things you do at half crazy, and then when you're full tilt crazy, that's a different level. I know none of you know what I'm talking about. He's full-blown crazy at this point. He's full-blown gone. I mean, he's having a bad day to the nth degree, right? He decides, by the way, vengeance is whose? And he has a problem. Lord, please punish them for not bowing to me. That's not something. You imagine praying that. God, I'm furious. Please get them because they won't bow to me. That's not a prayer God's going to do very well with, is it? You can't pray to God and be like, hey, they're bowing to me. They're not bowing to me. Will you sort them out? Well, all right. So he decides, look, go back to verse 1. He was the most powerful what? He probably could have just killed Mordecai and just be done with it. There probably wouldn't have been a lot of recompense. What happened to Mordecai? I don't know. He drank funny water. I don't know. He went missing. I'm guessing that Mordecai could have been killed and no one... Now, Esther's going to throw a fit. So it may be a bit more, in fairness, a bit more complicated than that. Because Esther's going to push it and say, where's Mordecai? So it's a bit deeper than that. But he doesn't just come after Mordecai. Look at what it says. It wasn't enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone, which is normally what happens when someone gets you, you just come after them, right? Instead, he looked for a way. He looked for a way. How far away from God and how filled of the devil do you have to be to look to a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes? Who does that sound like? Modern day. Hitler. Right? And by the way, Hitler, how did Hitler die? There you go. That's the devil. If you want to know what living for the devil looks like, it's Hitler. Fueled with rage, fueled with animosity, fueled with murder, and in the end, the best option you have. Look at Judas. Best option you have, you think, is what? Kill yourself. Yeah. Well, but when they shoot themselves, they realize they've just found accountability. But in the life of Hitler and Saddam Hussein and all these people, you can just see it. He looked for a way, and again, the devil's behind this, right? But God's over it. God isn't panicking. God's going to turn this around. He looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. Why? Because of his pride. Because he wants what the devil always wants. Why did Lucifer fall? Because he wanted the worship that only God can have. And that's what he tries to get in the end with the false spirit and the Antichrist. And verse 7. So in the month of April, that's about 474 BC, April, May time, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, this is crazy, lots were cast. Remember before Pentecost, lots is a weird thing, kind of like throwing dice, pulling. They had an effort, they did all this stuff. It's kind of like pulling straws. But for a Jewish people, they believed that God would be over the lots. Does that make sense? So it was more sacred and more serious than just throwing dice. It was like, God, we're going to cast these lots, and whatever that comes to be, we'll do it because we believe that's you. And God was over that, right? When you have the Holy Spirit, you don't need that. Other cultures, here's the problem in Persia, when they cast lots, they weren't casting lots to God. They were casting lots to their own what? God. And what's funny is, they refuse to cast lots to God, but God's going to be all over this. Look, none of this is incidental. None of this is by accident. God has a plan. He has a purpose. But God is going to take a year to fulfill that plan and purpose. Now, God could have done it in a day. But God, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So when it says lots, yeah, they're doing kind of the same thing, but they're casting lots, trusting not in God. But guess what? It doesn't matter who you cast lots to. God's still over what? All of it, all right? So look at what it says. Lots were cast in Haman's presence. Lots were called Purim. Now, that is casting lots in the biblical way to God, that had a purpose. That was all right. But what he's doing is casting not to God, but to determine the best day and month to take action. This is this weird, religious kind of mumbo jumbo. He wants to murder Jews, and he imagine that. Hey, to a God asking him, when can I just commit mass murder? I mean, what kind of God is he praying to? Or casting lots to? And he wants to know a day, the best day and month to take action. Who do you think chose the date? God does. He could have, if he had done it tomorrow, it would have been now God, again, look, God's over all of it. He's not going to panic if he had said tomorrow. Well, God could have done it. But look at what it says. And the day selected was March the 7th. A year later. God says we're going to give it a year. You know why? Because in a year, none of this will matter. He'll be dead. And God postpones it for a year. And God makes it happen. So you mean to say that God can change a lot who's offered to a different God? Yeah, God can do that. And God picks this date because it's all going to play out. Then Haman gets confident now, right? He's got his marching orders. And what's weird is he doesn't question it. He doesn't say, what about it? Why a year? The lot comes up and he says, I'm going to do it in a year. Can you imagine being filled with that much rage and contempt for a year? He's got to live with that for a year and make this plan. And he might think, I need a year to plan it. That's good. He might actually go home happy like that. Give me a year. You know, some people are planners and they like a year in advance. I'm good if it's a month. Lynn keeps buying me calendars like 2 years. I'm like, Lynn, I barely can fill out this year's calendar. Let's slow down on 2028. But he's a year out, right? And again, God's over that. Look at verse 8. Haman approached King Xerxes. King Xerxes has a problem. Who's his wife? Esther. What is she? Now the reason why God, there's a reason why God has put Esther in there, right? And like you said, he doesn't even know what's going on, the king. All right, so Haman approached King Xerxes and said, there is a certain race of people scattered throughout all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. This is what I'm telling you. This is exactly what should happen. Jewish people were Jewish. They kept themselves separate because what did they have in common? That doesn't mean you can't be in the world, but what did they have in common with the Medes and the Persians? They were Jews. They had a different God. It's like, what do Christians and the world have in common? Well, there's lots of similarities. We all get hungry. We all blah, blah. But with the nuts and bolts, the really serious stuff, there is no commonality. You serve a different God, have a different mind. I mean, it's vastly different. And he says, look, these Jews are different. Why would a king, now think about this, and there's a method of why I'm asking you this. If a king is over a province, and we said at the start, how many was there? I can't remember. 127 provinces. Why is that powerful to have 127 provinces? Not just in manpower, but what do you really like from 127 provinces? Tax, right? What do you suppose might be a problem if a king just says, wipe out a bunch of people who are going to pay me taxes? He's just said there are Jews everywhere spread across the whole province in Esther 3, right? Esther 3 verse 8. There is a certain race of people scattered through all the province. You know what all means? So in every province there was tax paying who? And by the way, they'd have to pay the taxes because God says render to Caesar what's? Check this out. What would happen if someone said, if someone told the president, kill every Christian, but here's what they put into the economy? You think, that would make them stop, right? These are people, why are they paying us? Because they trust God and they render to Caesar again. So you mean Christians actually pay the tax? Yeah, they pay the taxes. And here's how much your economy would lose. They're probably a little nervous about just wiping you out. They might have reasons to wipe you out. But it always comes back to money, right? Who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Well, that is meant to be an indictment. That is meant to be a slight, but that's actually a great honor. That's like someone saying to you, you know you're a Christian and you're different. Well, thank goodness. I'm glad you see that. They keep themselves separate from everyone. That's the whole point, that they would be so different that they would realize that there's God. Israel was to be different to promote God. Look at what it says. Their laws are different from those of any other people. Is that true? Yeah. Yes. And they refuse to obey the laws of the king. All right, well, what does that mean? Is that See, this is what the devil does. He puts a half-truth and wraps it in a lie. Would they refuse the king's orders? Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. There's certain orders they wouldn't. They couldn't get out of paying taxes. They couldn't get out of... But when the king, like for instance, if the king mandates bow before Haman, you know what a proper believer is going to say? Not doing it. So, is that a true statement? They refuse to obey the laws of the king. Well, yeah. And by the way, if this had been a real issue, don't you think the king would have figured it out by now? I mean, if Christians were this big a problem, you think that he would have figured that out? Like he needs Haman to be like, hey, by the way, you have a problem. All these Jews are like, they're messing up your whole king. He's been fine. He's been fine. Apparently, there's a disconnect between what you're saying because Xerxes isn't having a problem. It's not in the king's interest to let them live. It's not in Haman's interest to let them live. People always twist it. It's not in the king's interest. You ever had someone come and spin something that they say is for your benefit, but it's really for theirs? This is exactly what's happening. Hey, Nick, this is good for you. It's actually good for me, but if you'll buy it, that'd be great. And if I can con you into thinking it's good for you, we're all happy, right? It's like people who sell you stuff, and the only reason they're selling you stuff is because they get commission out of it. I don't care if you need it or not, but you're going to need it because I need my commission, right? When we worked at Best Buy, we were always asking for commission, but it's kind of a two-way, like, there's a good part in getting commission because you get paid and you're going to probably sell a bit better. But the problem is you're going to oversell, right? Hey, you need this TV. Right? You need an extra whatever. You know why? Not all people are that messed up, but commission has I guess there's pros and cons. But you can see these issues, and look at what it says. They refuse to obey, so it's not in the king's interest to let them live. If it pleased the king, here we go again. This is just that kind of like smarmy, like sleazy. If it pleases the king. You know how much Haman cares about the king? If he could get one over the king, guess what he'd do? If he could get ultimate power and really be king, Haman would take it. If it pleases the king, issue a decree. And here remember the difference between the Medes and the Persians. You know it's crazy in politics, right? Policies get signed into place, and then what does the next guy do? And we just have this kind of like, first day I'm just going to eradicate all that guy did, and we're going to do this. And then the 4 years later, I mean, it gets a bit ridiculous, like the law changes every 4 years, right? The difference with the Medes and the Persians was, and this is a big part of Esther, once it's signed, it's irrevocable. You cannot change that law. So, I mean, that's kind of smart and kind of dumb, right? I mean, what happens if you sign a bad law and you realize it's bad afterwards? That seems like a good idea, right? I mean, I'd be scared to death to say it. Imagine having bylaws that could not be changed under any circumstance. You'd make sure, like, let's just keep them short and sweet, can we? He's got this law that if he says it, it's irrevocable. And what's funny is the devil's like, oh, irrevocable law. If I just make an irrevocable law, I got God, checkmate. And God's like, not so much. I mean, this is what the devil does, right? I'm going to use this irrevocable law, and we're going to put God in a bind. Because once he says, kill all the Jews, we can't what? We can't change that. And God just smiles and like, oh, we'll see about that. Look what happens. And the reason I went on about the money and stuff and the taxes, look at what it says. If it pleases the king, issue a decree that they will be destroyed. And I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administrations to deposit it in the royal treasury. Now, whether that's true or not, whether he has that or not, but I think the inference is, see, that's what I'm getting at. this is going to cost you, but don't worry, I'm good for it. I'll give you money back. You see what I'm saying? I'm going to give you, and again, it's playing on people's. We're going to destroy these. Here's what evil kings think: destruction, but 10,000 large sacks of silver. And actually, in Xerxes, he's really not that bothered because he tells him you can do what you want with it. But Haman is coming and trying to throw money at him to he's just greasing his what? He's greasing his pockets to try and get his way. I'm going to give you all of this. Verse 10. The king what? That's why I told you. The king's just agreed to do what? Kill all the Jews. We even know the date in a year. This is what I'm saying about don't evaluate things too quickly. If you start reading the book of Esther, what would your evaluation be? If you start right now and didn't have a clue what was next, what would you say? Oh no, it's awful. This can't happen. Where are you, God? Blah, blah. I mean, if that's all, see, we play with limited information. If you're in the room and you're listening to Haman's plan, it looks, you might pray, God, don't let him set a date. I've set a date. Don't let the king agree. Don't let the king agree. And the king agrees. And you start to think, God, where are you? What are you doing? And yet, like I told you on Wednesday, if you let it play out, you'll look back and say, all right. So, again, this is deeper than Haman. This is deeper than Mordecai. This is war. This is the enemy. And by the way, God keeps doing this, and I keep telling you, in Ezra, we're in the same place as we are in Judges. God keeps giving us the same message. It can't be coincidence. Ezra's got to go and change her culture. Exactly what we spoke about. I'm not that smart to put those things together. I'm not that much of a planner to put those things together. But God has given us this message as a church, that we got to go and change the culture. Remember the famous line that's going to come in the next chapter. Maybe you were born for such. There you go. The king agreed, and here's what he did. He confirmed his decision. When he removes his signet ring from his finger and he gives it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy. Look at what the Bible says. It's clear. The enemy of what? The enemy of the Jews. The king, and then what's weird is Xerxes isn't even bothered about the money. He says, the money and the people are both yours to do with as you see fit. Haman's tried to run this greasy scheme, and the king's not even really that bothered. Which I'm not sure what that says about Xerxes. He's an interesting character too. The king said, the money and the people, do with it as you see fit. What are you doing, God? You've just allowed the enemy of the Jews to have free reign. But God's going to move. So on April the 17th, the king's secretaries were summoned. Remember, it's not irrevocable. Once it's done, it's done. He's done it. He's taken off the ring. When he takes off his signet ring and he does that, it's done. It's done. The king's secretaries were summoned, and the decree was written exactly as Haman dictated. The king didn't even write it. Haman dictates it. See, how bothered is Xerxes about this? He's not bothered. But this guy is writing all of this in the name of Xerxes. It was sent to the king's highest officers, the governors of the respective provinces, and the nobles of every province in their own scripts and languages. Obviously, every province had different languages. And so they wanted to be sure that everybody saw it in their own language. They wanted to make sure that everybody knew what was happening. So no one could say, oh, we didn't know. It wasn't in our language. They took the time to figure out every language and to write it in that language. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. The king doesn't even know what he's done. And Haman has come and he's thrown in this horrible dictation. And it's sealed. And that's the kicker, right? So again, it's all over, right? It's finished. There's no way out. Nah. Have you ever noticed in your life when you think there's no way out, God steps in and says, maybe there is. Just when you count him out, just when you think it's over, just when you're like, it's all doom and gloom, it's done, I'm beaten. Just when the devil's having a party. I love the picture of Jesus going down to the underworld when he's finished at the cross. And hell must have been having a party, and he just releases the captives. Look at what it says. Dispatches, verse 13, were sent by swift messengers. Why so quick? You got a year. Why does the devil want you to make decisions quickly? Yeah, because in 6 months maybe you're not as... Maybe Haman calms down. He probably wouldn't. But they're sent by swift messengers, swift, into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, you know what all means? Young, old, women, and children must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a what? On a single day. Now, if you're a Jew, that's a problem. Every Jew will find out. Every Jew can read it in their own language. You imagine your kids coming home and saying, you heard about this day? We're all dead. What's that meant to do to God's people? Yeah, scare the mess out of them, right? This is what I'm telling you. But God's going to do some amazing things. Every child, young, old, every Jew, every woman, killed, slaughtered, and annihilated. You can see why the devil loves that plan. That's been the plan of the devil from the start. And then he says this. This was scheduled to happen on March the 7th of the next year. And look, human nature never changes. How many people were bothered about killing Jewish people? One at this point. So how do you get people to commit a crime? Haman can't kill them all and slaughter them all, especially on what? On one day. So what does he do? He sweetens the pot. How does he sweeten the pot? Look at what it says. And the property of the Jews would be given to those who what? So what does that mean? Yeah, think about that. I have nothing against my Jewish relative. Oh, not relative. Neighbor. Sure like his stuff. How many people would kill you just to get your stuff? If you don't have much stuff, then maybe. They're probably not clamoring for my sweaty suit on a Sunday morning, right? I mean, it's probably like... But if you've got a lot, you think people would kill you for your stuff? And the more you have, the more likely what? There you go. So the devil sweetens a pot. How do I get people to hate them? Offer them a reward. Kill them, and guess what? You'll get all this stuff. Now, it's kind of a flawed plan, because what about the Jews who were poor in that? But, hatred just spirals, right? Fear spirals. They start doing it. And how do you get the stuff? I killed it. And it's all in the debt. I mean, it's crazy. But it doesn't really take you much to understand that people would kill for that, does it? Verse 14, a copy of this decree was to be issued as law in every province and proclaimed to every people, so that they would be ready to do their duty on the appointed day. Verse 15, at the king's command, the decree went out by swift messengers, and it was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa, right by where they were. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink. Now, can you imagine the evilness of that? You've just pronounced genocide. You've just pronounced death. You've just done that. And the best, you know what they do? Arrogantly, ignorantly, proudly, callously, go and get a drink. Yeah. Or try to. You've watched Dateline, right? Where people are like eating a meal and just casually talking about killing the wife. I mean, maybe you haven't, I have. That doesn't mean anything. I'm just telling you what happens on Dateline before you go back and like. But I mean, people are messed up. They're just sitting there nonchalantly eating the pizza saying, can you go around on Tuesday and just shoot her? And like, well, what is wrong with you? Like, people are, that's why this notion that people are good, you just get to know people. You realize that's just not true. Without God, we're not good at all. And so the king and Haman sat down to drink. Not a what? Not a worry in the world. No fear of the Lord. Xerxes is a little bit, I mean, there's so many problems with Xerxes. He shouldn't be doing that. But Haman's the real villain, right? The bigger villain. And it says they fell into confusion. Well, that's probably an understatement. What in the world is going on? Why are we going after the Jews? I mean, I wonder what would happen today if in America we were told, go and kill whoever it is and you'll get all their stuff. I wonder how many people would do that. I wonder how many people would say, go over to that country and kill them and whatever you get, bring back you have. I bet people would go, don't you? And the devil saw it. And see, this is what I'm saying. Right now in chapter 3, if you don't know the rest of the story, how much you're just like, you've got 1,000 questions, right? I mean, if you're a Jew and you get to hear about this and read about this, Esther's about to find out, what's your first thought? Oh, glory. And that's why I'm telling you, don't evaluate things straight away. And then next week we'll go through, and Esther now, you see why God has brought her to this palace. And Esther is in the exact position that Gideon was in, and that's why this is weird timing. Esther's in the exact position Gideon is in, the same exact position we're in. Go and fight the culture. And her first thing is, but if I go to the king and I'm not meant to be there, I'm what? I'm dead. And Mordecai is used by God to say, Esther, if you don't do something, it's not just you. He'll come after you too. But it's all the Jews. God has put you, Mordecai starts to put 2 and 2 together and says, God's put you here. And you're our ace in the hole. You're the one who can help us. And God's all over all of this. And I kind of wish you didn't know the rest of the story, because it would give you a natural reaction of what, and then you come back next week and be like, oh, thank goodness. But you've read the story, right? Stop reading the story. No, I'm just kidding. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts? It's a really amazing book. Any questions, any thoughts, any...